upside the head. So we've gotten so far down the road with this trauma thing that culturally, the toxic stress has built a tolerance where it's not
Wow.
even effective anymore. I get frustrated when I hear people always go to whoopings because it really highlights the detrimental and toxicity, the detrimental state and the toxicity we have in our culture. Because that's the first thing we connect with is beating our children. But our
Yeah.
children go through so many other traumatic things that we don't think that are traumatic, that we don't even understand how we are developing these youth to be able to expect and tolerate so much pain.
All right, here we go. Welcome back to another episode of Jarvis Hill Projected. And welcome to our first of a series of Get Your Head in the Game. What
Right.
are we talking about? Mental health. And actually, Brandon, this month is mental health awareness. So we kicking this show
Right.
right up on time. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. Every month should be mental health awareness month, but I get it. We gotta have something destined for people to get focused and realign themselves.
Exactly. Exactly. So I'm your host, Jarvis Hill. And who do I have with me? Man, the mental health expert. You guys are going to get to know Brandon. My brother's based out of Minnesota. And actually,
Yeah.
I tell the story all the time to people. It was my mental health counselor. So, the therapist. So everybody, welcome Brandon to the show again. Good to have you on, brother. How you been, man?
Hey man, I've been pretty good for the most part. My organization's throwing a pretty large conference, so I've been busy. But outside of that, man, maintaining to the best of my ability.
Yeah, when I was telling people about this show, they was really excited. We did a show a couple
Yeah.
weeks ago, and they were excited about the mental health conversation.
Right.
And the feedback that we got, you and I got together and looked at the questions and the comments and
Mhm.
the reviews from it, and we said what we'll do is, hey, going forward, we'll create a mental health show once a
Mhm.
month where people can come in. We're gonna have a topic. This topic is childhood trauma. How do you recognize it? Are you dealing with it? And we're
Right.
gonna get into this is not gonna be a superficial conversation tonight.
Right. Right.
We're gonna go a little deeper. So, we created this show once a month. We're gonna have a live show. Brandon and I coming in talking about mental health. We have different topics, and we want the community to make sure you guys lean in. So when you join us live, make sure you put comments in the chat. If you have questions, put those in the chat as well, because again, we can't have this conversation without the people, because that's who we try to impact, the people, right?
Absolutely.
All right, man. I like to say, let's get down to business. Before we get started, if you guys know, you know what to do. Hit that like and subscribe, because again, we're gonna be kicking out dope content and information like this so you can get better. What is this show about? It's about you, helping you get better, no matter what stage or what age you are in your life. We come to serve you. All right, so tonight, man, let's get down to business, Brandon. Trauma,
Yeah.
childhood trauma. First off, what is trauma?
Yeah. Trauma is an interesting thing to define in today's world and society because it's been naturalized where almost everything is trauma for people. And it's been overused, I'll be honest, as well in some spaces. But the way that I've utilized trauma from a clinical perspective, the way that I've done it just in the work that I do in social services is I boil it down to this very easy definition for people to understand and to connect to, and I say trauma is a deep emotional wound. And that deep
Mm,
emotional wound can be something that that usually comes from toxic stress and toxic stress environments. So, what are some examples of deep emotional wounds? Well,
yeah.
growing up in a domestic violence household, being bullied severely, being neglected, being abused, sexually, physically, emotionally abused, being harassed, being incarcerated, being
Mm,
separated from your biological parents, um, you know, being humiliated over and over and over, especially by people who you deem to be people who are supposed to care and love you. Those can all be traumatic things for a young person to go through. Hell, those can be traumatic things for an adult to go through. But during those developmental stages of a young person, they're even more detrimental because you're just developing your brain. You're just developing who you are, your identity. You're trying to understand the world around you, and then you have this trauma that comes in. And a lot of times, trauma doesn't just happen in a vacuum. There's usually multiple different factors going on at one time, and that starts to impact you as a person, and it literally starts to shape your brain towards a survival mode to avoid trauma as best as possible. I'm not going to get too much into the brain science today because we don't have good visuals and things for people to check out. But it is something serious that we do end up going through. Just like our bodies go through puberty, so do our brains. And when you have a lot of trauma, when you got a lot of toxic stress going on in your life, your brain starts to adapt and wire itself for your survival. So when you see like middle school kids who are just having a lot of troubles in, like, let's say school, their concentration is low. They get very agitated very quickly. Any little thing could tick them off. Chances are, if you look at home environment, look at their social situation, hell, sometimes you can even look at the social economic status for some youth, and you can see when things aren't aligned and things aren't stable, those youth struggle. And what ends up happening is those youth are adjusting to the struggling that they're going through. So things like study skills and things like that, those things aren't always the predominant thing for the brain, for their brain development. Their prominent, focus is really things like survival
Sure.
and being safe and things of that nature. So, a lot of times when we look at young people or adults who've gone through childhood trauma, and we can connect those dots to what kind of happened to them, it leads to a better understanding of what they're dealing with in today's time.
So let's bring it home and bring out some tangible experiences that we've made have
Yep.
had and kind of talk about it as a collective. So I remember growing up, and I wasn't a bad kid, but I remember getting whoopings and spankings with
Hmm.
whatever was in reach, right? If it was,
Right.
it needed to hit me one time, or give me one time, whatever it
Right.
was, or we have the famous saying like, hey, go outside and grab me a switch.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Things like that. Is that could be what we call a traumatic experience, or is that something that, hey, I'm really trying to discipline my child, but they're using all kind of tools and things to do so? How and
Yeah.
nowadays you can't touch, lay a pinky on a child
Right.
to discipline. So what does that look like, and how does that impact from a childhood trauma perspective in
Yeah.
how we parent today?
Yeah. You want to go there? You want to
Yo,
go deep?
let's go there, man. We got to.
I'm gonna say something that people ain't gonna feel comfortable with.
Uh-oh.
Whoopings and spankings in the black community are no longer traumatizing unless they get abusive. We've used
Mm,
whoopings and spankings for so many generations that has been normalized into the culture where some youth, young people, expect to get whooped. They expect to get their butt spanked, and it's not a fear method. And you see this with a lot of young kids when they get like 8, 9, and 10. Them whoopings don't really affect them no more. They're like,
that's
all
right.
right, whatever. And in this generation, where we have a different connection to our parents, we got young people that they ain't scared of their mom and dad. Like back in our day, hell, even my parents, your mom, my grandmother, but somebody's mom might be like, I'm gonna call you. Wait till your dad get home. These
Mm-hmm.
kids don't give a damn if they get dad get home. They don't give a damn if they'll knock you upside the head. So we've gotten so far down the road with this trauma thing that culturally the toxic stress has built a tolerance where it's not
Wow.
even effective anymore. I get frustrated when I hear people always go to whoopings because it really highlights the detrimental and toxicity, the detrimental state and the toxicity we have in our culture, because that's the first thing we connect with is beating our children. But our children go through so many other traumatic things that we don't think that are traumatic, that we don't even understand how we are developing these youth to be able to expect and tolerate so much pain. Being separated from your biological parents can be seen as a traumatic thing, but you don't know who you come from, where you come from. We see this a lot with kids who have been what they call transracial adoption. So if you grab
Yeah.
a kid from North or South Korea or something, and then they come
Yeah.
here and then they have a new family that ain't Korean at all, North or South Korean, they have this like longing and this disconnection from who they are, their cultural heritage. Well, hell, in the black community, we've had tons of that, but we haven't had always the transracial part, even though that's a big part of it too when you're looking at community. But you might have been with auntie, your grandma, or hell, I've even seen it where I've seen people who the biological guardian was like a girlfriend of the dad, like 3 times removed and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we have these disconnections from our biological families and parents that can be just as traumatic as getting your butt whooped for 2 or 3 years. But we don't think of it like that, right? Because
Yeah.
we've always just kind of pieced together things. And when we look in our community, we take our community as black culture has been nothing but responding to trauma. That is what black culture is, from the foods we eat to the musics we listen to and we've created, from the clothes we wear, the nicknames we have, everything, the way we dance, the songs we develop, how we communicate to one another. It's all been based in surviving trauma. We could say
Wow.
racism and white supremacy, but it doesn't stop just there. It also deals with anti-blackness. That's how we've been able to navigate. So, unfortunately, for so many of us, our childhood trauma is really generational trauma, intergenerational trauma, historical trauma that's been passed down from one generation onto the next. Most black folks who have trauma, their trauma started before they were even born. Myself, you said let's get personal. I grew up in a domestic violence household. I knew that beating on women and beating on children was wrong. I seen it way too much too often. But one of the things that I learned as I got older was how did my mom find herself into that dynamic? What happened?
Mm.
Well, she had a disconnection relationship with my grandma that I did not know. And when I found that out, when my grandma let out a family secret and told me the domestic abuser in the family, who was my stepfather, was not my real dad. I thought he was my dad the whole time. But
Wow. Wow.
couple weeks before my 12th birthday, my mom's mom, my grandma, decided to let out the family secret, and then that revealed some ugly truths, but that they've had ever since my mom got pregnant as a teenager. So my mom was pregnant with me as she was in senior year in high school. So she literally
Wow.
walked across the stage with me in her belly, and then gave birth to me a few weeks later. So
Wow.
like that trauma started somewhere. So they were bickering and fighting and going back and forth because there was a level of shame there. This was back in the mid '80s, where a lot of teenagers were starting to have more babies, but 10 years prior to that, if a teenager had a baby, that wasn't something to be proud of. You wasn't getting a baby shower. That wasn't happening. That's a more modern thing, and it became more acceptable when more and more young women started to get pregnant. So my grandma was old school. She wasn't down for none of that. And what
Okay.
ended up happening was they bumped heads. And I never knew any of that growing up until my grandma released that secret. So what do I do as that young 11 and 12-year-old young man? Well, I start to develop these ideas in my head about who, it's my fault that my mom and grandma don't get along. Because if I wasn't born, they would never be fighting. That's a real scenario. You don't understand how often kids blame themselves for the things that their parents have done, because it's a natural thing to be selfish, as children are. That's why they fight over things. You can give a kid the same toy, but they'll still fight over it. Like it's like that was mine. It's like y'all got the same thing, because naturally young people are selfish, so we'll blame ourselves for things as well. So for me, growing up, I had that level of kind of stress and trauma where I messed up the family dynamic. Right, the secret came out. I didn't need to know this. I blame myself for that. Another thing I told myself was I can't depend on men very early. I'm like 12 years old. I just got a little hair on my chin. I remember I had a little hair into my armpits. I was feeling myself. I was playing football. I was being recruited. I didn't need no man, because the dude who I thought was my dad, I didn't like him because he was always causing hell at home. But when I found out he wasn't my dad, it was like a relief. So then I went to go meet my biological father on my birthday, nonetheless. He shows up late and drunk. So I was just like, man, I got the abuser at home, and then this dude who is supposed to be my dad, he don't even give a damn enough to show up on time. So I told myself, shoot, I remember that ride home. I was on Interstate 94 here in the Twin Cities, going back to St. Paul. I was like, I'm good, man. I don't need nobody. I'm gonna figure this thing out myself. And that's a bad mentality for a young black man, because we know we need role models, we need connections. I ain't trust no black dude. Nothing. You told me something, I halfway believed you. If you wasn't my great grandfather or my grandfather, chances are I didn't believe nothing you was telling me. Coaches, teachers, it didn't matter, because I knew that black men always had something up their sleeves. That's a messed up mentality to have. And I had to go to therapy to deal with that, man. I mean, I was in my early 20s before I kind of broke that down and started to say, okay, I can't keep living my life like this, because if I want to build this community, work within my community, I have to
Okay.
bridge that gap that black men have. So I'm gonna pause right there and let you get in.
Yeah, no, I mean that's heavy,
Yeah,
because us as adults growing up in the 80s and 90s, you start to realize as adults that we experienced a lot. We
right,
had good childhoods, but it was a lot of things that went on that the parents and the
right,
grandparents didn't talk to us about.
right,
And and like you say, it was passed on, like, and that's why we don't communicate. Um, let's talk about like kids, because kids are malleable, right? They're still growing
Right.
and developing.
Hmm.
So how do you, I guess, in today's world as a parent, because we're going to get to the question
Yeah.
of as an adult how we're still dealing with some of those childhood traumas. But as we see today with these kids, how can we identify a kid that's been traumatized, but they're very functional?
Yeah. I mean, you sometimes you will know because you're dealing with the same trauma the kids are usually, but some of the telltale signs that you should pay attention to, especially with those early adolescents and like when I say early adolescents, I'm talking like 11, 12, 13-year olds
Uh-huh.
and up, is extreme changes in their appetite, extreme changes in their sleep, whether they sleep too much, sleep too little, eat too much, not eating enough, and there's no like medical thing going on, right? So they're not taking any medications or anything like that. But if you know these huge shifts in behavior, they might isolate a little bit more, or they might extremely change the way they dress, and they might wear like darker clothes and stuff like that. Something's up, something's going on, and they're not necessarily communicating to you what's happening, and that's how you can tell. But a lot of times, you know that a child has experienced childhood trauma because you typically experienced a similar level of trauma that they're also going through, being highly mobile and homeless, having food insecurities in the home, so not being able to be nourished and eat, living in a community where there's gunshots ringing off all the time. Those things are traumatic, but we don't talk about those things. And unfortunately, a lot of times the stuff becomes very normalized, as I said earlier. But what ends up happening is these kids are living with these high levels of what we call toxic stress. So their anxiety levels are extremely high. One of your main hormones for when you're dealing with stress is called cortisol, and they have high cortisol levels, which oftentimes leaves you discombobulated a lot. So you're not
Mm,
always thinking very clearly. You're not making rational decisions all the time. You're just kind of living in the moment and doing things from here to there. And you can know, and you notice, I notice this a lot with a lot of the youth that I work with. Well, they'll do something, they might get in trouble. Like let's say they went to the corner store and stole some chips, right? And I asked them, I'm like, man, I know you got money. I know your mom got paid last week. I know she broke you off with a dub. Why did you steal them chips? And what do young people say? Man, I don't know, man. I just took them. They just, the opportunity was there. It's like, bro, what was you thinking? They wasn't, because their brains are so activated with the stressors of what's going on that they're just looking for any opportunity to do whatever they want. That's how you can tell when you have young people who aren't always making the most rational decisions, and you're like, man, come on. And we know teenagers and young people do dumb stuff. That's just a part of
yeah,
learning and growing.
that's
But
right.
unfortunately, a lot of our youth do dumb stuff that get them in big trouble. And that's the thing that we have to pay attention to, is like making sure that our kids are, when they are making the decisions that they're making, that they're actually thinking them out to the best of their ability.
So let's transition to from, because we're talking about. I see you. What's let me shout out Nina Evans. I see you. What's going on,
So,
Nina? What's up, Billy Hill? I see you. What's going on? Thank you guys for joining. We're talking about childhood trauma. Now, as an adult, one of the things I kind of talk about when people ask me, why did you go get a therapist? Why did you go get a
yeah.
counselor? So the story that I give is, you know, um, as a child, you have these seeds planted in your mind,
Hmm.
and these seeds grow as trees. Some may be good trees, some may be bad trees, but you don't really know because you're a child and you're just kind of going through and experiencing life. But as I got older and I started to reflect and review my life, I'm like, man, I start to learn different things about, not having a father in my household, and why is that, and start to question all these different things. And so I had to evaluate myself, and I start to dig up these, what I call these roots or these trees. I
Hmm.
would have to try to dig them up of the behaviors that wasn't, beneficial to me as an adult. So
Hmm.
I started digging up these trees, Brandon, and some behaviors I could change because I
Hmm.
could get to the root, but some of them still there, but I learned to cope and manage them.
Right.
So as an adult, how do you recognize that you may be dealing with childhood trauma and not even recognize it?
Yeah, it's a big question, and there's a couple ways to identify it. One, if you're somebody who lacks consistency in life, like you
Mm,
keep switching jobs, tw- I mean, you 25 and you done had 30 jobs. Like you should know something ain't right.
Something
And
ain't
it
right.
ain't, yeah, something ain't right. You and them 30 jobs, you only been the longest you've been at one of them was like 6 months. Like that's how you know like something's not right. Something's not clicking. Right? When you have abundance of unhealthy relationships is another telltale sign. When you often feel stuck and you don't really know why, but you might not be able to kind of move forward or kind of get your voice heard. If you notice that you have self-defeating behavior, so you're getting in your own way, but you don't know
Mm,
why you're getting in your own way. Those are usually some telltale signs that something deeper is happening. You mentioned seeds, right? The seeds to the trees. Those are what we call core beliefs. And our core
mm,
beliefs are developed very young. Our worldviews are developed over time, but our core beliefs are developed very young. So if let's say you had a parent, or hell, let's just say you had somebody you looked up to, maybe it was just another kid in the neighborhood, and they was always saying, "Oh man, you lazy, man, you lazy," right? They just keep telling you lazy. And then next thing you know, you might not see this person for years, but you just remember them always saying you lazy.
you
And
lazy.
then you get on a job and you might not be doing, you might be having a rough day. And then that supervisor's like, man, come on, man, you can't be doing this lazy. And then you get
Trigger.
triggered. Boom. Now you going upside this person's head and they talking about you need to go. Or you done cuss this person out. So I don't know who the hell you think you talking to, right? You just snap out, right? That's because that core belief was plant. It was seeped literally into your subconscious mind, and you kept hearing that lazy, lazy, lazy. And this person who ain't got nothing to do with that just makes a reference to your behavior that day, but to you it was so much bigger than that.
That's
And then
right.
you just snap, and boom, now you done lost this job, or you might get arrested, or your reputation might get tarnished, whatever the case may be, because of something that happened years ago that you never dealt with. But you probably didn't even know you need to deal with it in the first place. A lot of times those core beliefs, if we never work through them, they show up later on in our lives. And it's important because you talked about coping. Coping is one of the best tools we can have, because a lot of times, and this is one of the things that I get frustrated about with the self-help genre, because there's a lot of quality people in this space, but they set you up to keep selling to you. And
Yep.
what they tell
Talk
you is
about
this: they tell you that you need to heal from the pain. And every time I hear somebody say you need to heal, I just get a cringe feeling, because it's a setup. They make it seem like being healed is a destination. What they need to say, and what I say, is you need to be healing, because over time, the things that you have dealt with, they don't go away. Your trauma never leaves you. My trauma with my abusive stepfather, it's not gone, but I've done a whole hell of a lot of work to minimize it and cope with it as it comes. I
That's
mean,
right.
and when I was in college, I used to have crazy night terrors. I can hear his voice. Even today, if a male says my name in a particular voice tone, I kind of like I get this like tingle in my back, like ooh, because it just reminds me of him. I
Yeah.
can't get
Yeah.
I can't get rid of that, but I know what it is. I have awareness and I have coping skills, so I can say, okay, that's that. That's just him. He ain't gonna overtake anything that I got going on. I'm gonna keep pushing forward. Let me breathe and calm myself down. Let me shake it off and get back
Yeah.
to bed, whatever the case may be. So what we fail to do is recognize the things on our journey that are our triggers. And unfortunately, the people who suffer the most from that, us not being able to recognize it, are the loved ones around us, our kids, our
Yeah.
partners, our family members, and stuff like that. So it's important for us to understand what are those things that do quote unquote activate us or trigger us, so that we can make sure that we're healing and going upon our journey to the best of our ability. One more quick thing I want to say with this: I went to therapy when I was 20. I think I was 24. 24 to 25. I spent like 10 months in therapy. And I thought I dealt with all my daddy, mama issues, all my childhood trauma. And then 2 years later, what happened? I had a baby, had my daughter. And I
Mm.
remember that first month of having my daughter, I was an emotional wreck. Dude, I didn't know what the hell was going on with. My wife was looking at me like, bro, you gonna be okay? Like, was this a good decision? Baby's healthy, life is moving in the right direction, but I'm just not feeling it. I'm just like, I'm
Yep.
just feeling out of place. And I went back to therapy. And you know what I found out? I
What?
realized that all that childhood trauma stuff I dealt with was from a standpoint of being a young 25-year-old male. I never thought about how it would impact me as a father. So over time, your life changes, and that
Yep.
trauma can seep back up when you're in a different space and season in life. So I had to like redo a lot of stuff because I was fathering without a foundation and didn't realize that I was feeling incompetent and not understanding because I didn't have those lessons or I didn't have anybody to call and say, "Hey, Dad, how can I handle this situation?" Right? I was by myself. And granted, I'm a marriage and a family therapist. I got all the book knowledge, but it's different than having the no the head knowledge and the heart knowledge are two different things. And what ends up happening with childhood trauma is it hits you in the heart. And when it hits you in the heart, it's very difficult to understand what to do because the heart and the head aren't always aligned. That's why we do what's called cognitive behavioral therapy because we want to try to get you back in sync. But for me, it was out of sync because I never dealt with that level of dealing with, okay, what do I do as a dad? So it's important for us to understand that healing is a journey and not a destination.
Man, listen, let's slow it down because we're talking about childhood trauma.
Yeah.
You said something, and I always, I'll keep my pencil because I have to take notes, and I know I'm gonna catch the replay. And guys, I know if you don't catch the live and you don't put your question in the chat, you still can comment and put questions in. We'll get back to you. But listen, you said you were fathering without a foundation.
Yeah.
Man, if that's so, that resonates with me because that same, I was similar situation. I had thought I had dealt with my previous situation with my father not being in the household. And we had a conversation, and then I had my first son. I was walking out of the park. I remember vividly. He was
Yeah.
like 3 or 4. He was walking. I had we was holding hands, and it just hit me. I started
It's
like kind of crying a little bit. I'm like, what
yep.
is wrong with me?
Yep.
And man, I started like replaying and figuring out, trying to get back to it. I was like, oh, I
That's
was
what it is.
father without a foundation.
Yep. Hmm.
I had all these emotions, and then I started to get frustrated and jealous that I didn't have what my son is having now.
Right.
So
Right.
that kind of leads me to my next question, Brandon. Is as an adult now, as we're living in this world now, let's say we've dealt with our childhood dramas, right? Let's say we worked on it to a degree. But can our childhood drama still seep through and pass on to our kids? Or if we've addressed it in coping with it to a degree, can that still impact our kids?
It can if you're not actively working on it. Um, and I always tell parents that like, I don't believe in generational curses. I know that's something that we talk about all the time. It's a generational curse. It's like
I got to
not
break the generational
yeah.
curse.
You do need to break a cycle though. Like it might not be a generational curse, but it's a cycle of abusive behavior that has gone on in your family, and you picked up on those habits and patterns and boundaries and all that stuff. And it might be up to you to change that. So it won't get to your children if you are one aware of how it's affecting you and how it's affecting your ability to parent. And when you're able to do that, then you start making different choices. So it can skip your children. For example, I'm blessed to say that my kids have no concept of domestic violence. They don't know what it is. Like I can ask my daughters right now, what is domestic violence? They would be looking at me like I'm talking a different language because they never got to see that. But I had to see it. My wife's seen it, and so that was something we were very intentional about not bringing that level of struggle and frustration and anger and violence into our home. They don't
That's
know.
right.
Have they seen me and my wife get into arguments? Absolutely. I don't know what couple doesn't, but they'll never see one of us strike one of each other. Never. It would just never happen, right? We don't even really raise our voices. We get into disagreements about stuff, but it's nothing like what I seen growing up. That's how you break those curses. Being very intentional about how you want to parent, how you want to do things. Now, everybody doesn't have that two-parent setup, but I think if you're being a healthy adult and you're bringing other healthy adults around your children, that's what's important, so that they don't repeat those cycles. And I think another thing that happens too when you talk about single family homes is that you have to figure out ways for your children to be exposed to the other parent if the other parent is available and alive. Whether they're healthy or not, your children are going to need to know who that person is.
That's
And
right.
that might mean that you have to restrict the type of engagements they have if they're not healthy. But they need to know if that other parent is the way they are, they need to see that for themselves instead of having you tell them, because they're going to make judgments in their head about themselves if they don't have those experiences.
That's right.
So as the healthy parent, you have to figure out, okay, how do I create an opportunity for a relationship to be developed and let my child decide what they want it to be for them as they get older. And I say that from a clinical perspective because I've done therapy with so many adults and young people who come from single parent homes, and that longing for a connection to a parent who isn't there is just as traumatic as anything else.
Yo, listen, we're talking about childhood trauma and how it impacts you as a child, how's it impacting you as an adult, how's it impacting your kids. So if you're just joining us, we're talking about childhood trauma. We're about to get to the Q&A section. So if you guys have any questions, please put them in the chat because we're going to get to those in a second. Uh, you talked about generational curses.
Yeah.
Uh, let's talk about this for a second. As a young boy and as a man now, I remember growing up. Hey, you can't cry. You shouldn't be crying. Suck it up, right? You can't really express yourself. And then I was talking to someone the other day. Is they were dealing with their weight. They were having weight problems. Growing up, they weren't really overweight, but the grandma would always talk about their weight.
Mm-hmm.
The
Yep.
mom now talks about their weight, and even
Yep.
as an adult, this
Core
person is
belief.
physically fit. Now it's
Mm-hmm.
still like
Mm-hmm.
they work out because they're motivated by. Now I think it may be childhood trauma, right?
It is.
But what you said something earlier, somebody still may say something to them to this day, even though they're in shape. They may say something about the weight, and all of a sudden it's triggered.
Mm-hmm.
So how can you catch the generational? Like you said, it's not generational curses, but it's
Mm-hmm.
the generational things that's being passed down,
Mm-hmm.
unbeknownst to the grandmother or the mother, not knowing what kind of impact they may be having on your mental.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you the easy answer and I'll give you the hard answer. The easy answer is to go to get some professional help. So somebody who can help, who's third party, doesn't know you or doesn't know your family. Now, in some areas, like small towns, you get a therapist who do know the family, but they can be objective because they've been trained to. Somebody who can give you some objective truth and help you understand what's going on and where that comes from for you. Because like you said, this person's physically fit, but they're still having these kind of responses to mom and grandma saying these things about their weight, but they might be ripped, they might be cut, but since the scale says they're 245, then they're like they tripping because they want to be 210 or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But they might be physically where they need to be. Now, that's the easy answer, is get professional help. The hard answer is this. It's something I call the ABCs of resilience. And the A is for adaptive awareness. So one, you got to figure out what it is. So he might not recognize that you know, his level of being kind of stuck with dealing with what people say about his weight and him kind of cycling, trying to lower his weight, has to do with grandma and mom. He might associate it with something completely different. So
Mm.
he has to have the awareness of where it actually comes from. Once you have that awareness, you got to do something with it. That's why it's adaptive awareness, right? So knowing isn't just enough. You got to figure out, I need to do something about it. You got to be motivated to move.
So awareness is your first step to recovery. Go ahead.
Right, right. So then the B is for balance and boundaries. So now that you know, and now that you had enough motivation to move, now you got to figure out, what balance do I need? What I need to do for myself and for other people? How do I balance my time and my energy? How do I balance my compassion and my accountability to myself? How do I balance these things that go on within my life? And then once you kind of figure out what healthy balances you need, then you got to start setting some boundaries. And this is the hardest part. That's why most people are not successful in therapy, because they don't want to set boundaries on other people. Getting healthy is selfish, and we just need to get over it, right? If you want to be good, you got to be selfish. You got to take care of yourself. Now, they just let out the mask mandate on the airplanes, and what do they tell you on the airplanes? They tell you, if the plane goes down, secure your mask first before you help somebody else. It's the same thing when you are trying to take care of yourself. You gotta set some boundaries. And the hardest thing, and this is definitely for Black folks, the hardest thing for us is setting boundary with our families. We are so used to being stuck in traumatized cycles with our families that we won't tell mama no. We won't tell, our cousin, no, I can't do that right now.
Wow, but
Sometimes
why would we do that, Brandon? Let's get down to like
because
why do we feel bad about that?
because we have been conditioned to always struggle, and when you do better, that means that you are doing better than someone else, and you are taught to feel bad about that. This is why a lot of people who reach success in this society disconnect from their blackness. Is because it's
Mm.
easier to just completely disconnect than to sit in that survivor's remorse, because that's another whole nother level of guilt and shame
Oh,
that many of us don't want to be honest about
so,
and talk
so,
about.
so let me interject something. Is that when people say like when they see you elevating or having some level of success? Is that when they say you need to be humble? And
Yeah,
I don't know, is that the
yeah.
same kind of idea?
They're giving you messages, what we call memes. They're giving you these messages to temper down your success. Or they'll say a little things like this. I hear stuff like this all the time. Oh, I see you. I see you. You're doing good. I'm trying to get like you. Like they'll say these things, and you're just like, what the fuck does that even mean? Like, what is that? And but what they're saying to you is, I see you that you're progressing and it's making me feel some type of way. Now
Wow,
they might not know what that type of way is just yet.
wow.
This
Let's
is why
hear.
we get a lot of this is where we get a lot of like jealousy and hatred and stuff, and people start acting different when we start to excel and move forward in life. And it's a toxic thing in our culture that we don't want to talk about. We don't want to admit how that toxicity sits
Yep.
within our own families. It's usually somebody you know who has the most hatred for what you're trying to do, but nobody talks about it, right? We say cute stuff like "let your haters be your motivators." Well, shit, that's hard when that's your mama. Like that, what are you supposed to do then, right? We have to get honest if we really want to get better with
That
our
is.
mental health, with our success, and that boundary. It's not just about saying no. Boundaries are about an expectation for how I expect people to treat me and how I treat myself. It's a two-parter. So how I expect people to treat me and how I treat myself. And you have to get to a place where you can articulate that
That's
to
right.
other people so that they know that's a boundary that Jarvis doesn't jive with. Like he don't mess with that. Like I know that that's something, Jarvis, he ain't down for that. And people have to respect that because they respect you as a person. That we got a long way to go before we all get on that level, but you can start that today. Now let's get to the C, and then we can hop onto some questions if we have any. The C is for consistent, constructive choices. I'm gonna say that one more time. Consistent, constructive choices. One of the things that I've seen, therapy, real life, hell, even myself sometimes, is we'll do something right, good, excellent, and we'll never do it again. It's like,
Oh, wow. Okay.
we never do it again. We have to be okay with when stuff works. And yes, success is very scary because we don't always know what's on the other end. It's sometimes hard to predict what happens when you reach a certain level of whatever you're trying to do. And that can be scary. But what's not scary for so many people, especially if you've been struggling for so long, is failure because you know what to expect. You know you got to get out the mud again. You know you got to re up and all that. Like that's the mentality we have. But hell, I ain't trying to keep re up every 3 to 4 months, man. I'm trying to excel. I'm trying to build, and I'm trying to get this thing to a whole nother level. I'm trying to scale. We got a re up mentality. We don't have a scale mentality. That's in business, in life, in relationships, and our well being. We got to scale. It ain't just about reing up. Like we got to get out of that level. That's just one dimension below victimization, where we feel like we can't never excel beyond something, and we just embrace the suck. But we have to be able to scale beyond what we got going on. So again, consecutive constructive choices is something that I'm big on. When stuff works, keep doing it, and then be able to take a risk to try something new.
Wow. So listen, I'm gonna ask you a question, Brandon, but I'm gonna go ahead and
Yeah.
set the stage. I want you guys, if you have any questions, and also if you don't mind, put your names in the chat so we can shout you out. But so Q&A time. But so Brandon, and this is a question, but I don't want you to go, I guess, too deep because I know it's gonna be
All
another
right. I
topic,
won't.
but you're gonna build on it.
I won't go. Go ahead.
Marriage. We're talking about childhood trauma. One person comes into the marriage, has dealt in coping with their childhood trauma. Other person unknowingly still dealing with childhood trauma, but unaware of it. So as we give people time to get their questions or throw them in the chat if they have any, talk about how you deal with that in the marriage when you have a person who's dealing with their childhood and coping with it versus the other party is not even aware of it and still being impacted by the childhood trauma.
Yeah, this is not an easy one because you deeply care for the other person, right? You love them, you're building a life with them. You're going through struggle. You two are sharing the highs and the lows all together. And when you're actively working on your stuff and they're not, you feel compelled to motivate them or encourage them to do the same. One thing that I've learned, even my own marriage, almost ruined it, was trying to change my wife as I was evolving into something. Now,
Mm.
now it wasn't dealing with childhood trauma per se. I was going more the super pro black route, and she was just like, "Dude, you are changing way too fast for me. Like we changing diets and you want me to go natural and all, and she was just like, dude, you need to slow down, bro.
Hold on,
And,
brother man. Hold
yeah,
on. Slow down a little bit.
and I did, but because I was getting lost in that myself, and when I realized that, I was like, oh, I'm becoming something that I'm becoming a fictional piece of who I truly am and my authentic self, and I had to scale back on some of that. Now, still love the learning that I had from that, but I had to slow down. And it was my wife who was kind of the mirror for me at that point, who was
Mm,
like, "This isn't healthy for you. Like you're not doing what you need to do for us. Like you're not working on yourself to better our dynamic and what we got going on." And that's what's important. So when you are dealing with your childhood trauma, you have to keep in mind that you are trying to better yourself, but you're also doing it to better the situation that you have around you. And then when you're married, that includes your wife or your husband or whatever the dynamic is between your marriage. Now, with that though, you do want to encourage them to do stuff or at least accept what you have going on. So I would encourage conversations, but I wouldn't encourage people to try to convert their partner into doing the same thing that they're doing because it don't work like that. Stay true to who you are in your word because what can happen, and this happened in my marriage, is as you continue to preach and do the things you do and you show up and lead by example, your partner may have a situation where they know exactly who to turn to. So for me, this is back in like 2013, 14. I was super pro black, man. Down with white supremacy. This is before you could say white supremacy out in public. Like that used to be taboo. Now it's all over the place. But back in the day, man, I was like hard on it, man. I'm talking about Dr. Wellesley, Umar Johnson, all them folks, man.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I was deep into
In
it,
the park, all
and,
that.
and I'm just like, man, down with white supremacy all day. And I remember this. My wife went to work. She used to work for Target in HR, and she had a situation, and there was clear as day racism, man, clear as day racism. And she came home, and I knew something was wrong. But you know how you been with somebody, you know when something's wrong. I'm
Yep.
like, what's wrong? What happened? She was like, you were right. She's like, you were just right. And she broke down what happened. And I said, I told you, man, racism is gonna come slap you in the face one day. I told you. And then but I also I didn't blame her for not listening to me, but I had some strategies for how she should deal with the situation because she had to go back to work the next day. And
Okay.
but she knew who to come to have the conversation, and she knew that I was gonna love on her and not judge her based on what she couldn't. The conversation could have been different. I could have been like, "Oh, you should have been listening," and I told you about them racist crackers, and I could have just went off. I could have went crazy, but
Yep.
I didn't. I just understood what it was, and she had to go through her own journey and process, and I just had to help her along the way as I was going through mine.
That's a beautiful story too, man. Because I can identify with that, and I
Yeah,
think you had to learn to, even though you was working on yourself, and that's part of, like, you had your boundaries, but you
right,
also have to recognize that if you're going to be a unit, a marriage, a couple, you have to
right,
make sure that you're not leaving someone behind, either sharing that information and being patient. You have to be patient with yourself and your own growth and development, and then you also have to be patient with your significant other if they want to hear what you're going through, right? Because it can be frustrating if they're not trying to lean in and better themselves or be a part of your journey. So
right.
it can feel lonely for that person in that relationship. But again, uh, do you, if you guys don't have any questions, man, hey, I think we knocked it out the park, Brandon, man. It's the first of many episodes about
Right.
mental health. We talked about, man, we talked about a lot of
Yeah.
good stuff tonight, man. I got the notes. I can't even
Cool.
recap. I'm gonna be honest with you. It was so. Give us the highlight of the solution.
Sure.
I want to talk about the problem. So
Yeah.
highlight, and I know it's we can't deep dive because there's so much material that we'd have to get into.
Right.
Dive into solutions.
Well, one of the biggest solutions that we can put in place is to understand that childhood lasts forever. So the things that you experience as a young person, they stick with you. They don't go away. They don't disappear. And what you have to do is figure out what healthy coping mechanisms work for you. There's a lot of easy, ABC plans out there. I mean, I gave a framework earlier today, but that looks different for everybody.
That's right.
But that doesn't mean that those kind of what we call turnkey or checkbox solutions will work for you. You have to figure out what's best for you and make sure that it's healthy. That's the best solution. The other thing I would say is if you're a parent or you plan to be a parent or a caregiver is that you do your best not to repeat the cycles that you've experienced onto your kids. And if you feel like you have, don't blame yourself. The best thing you can do is show up differently for those children now that you know something different
That's
than
right.
than to sit in the guilt because they may have turned out or they may have experienced something that you've experienced. It's way too common for people to blame themselves for the things that go wrong. Again, a lot of the situations that we find ourselves in, it's not always our fault, but we do have a lot of responsibility into what happens next. And that's one of the biggest things that we can do. For some people, that means getting professional help. For others, that means just changing some habits in your everyday life. And then for some other people, that might mean cutting off people in relationships and setting those firm boundaries. Because a lot of time we get ourselves in situations dealing with other people's stuff, and then it becomes our stuff. We got to figure out a way to cut that off so we can live our best life while we have it. So, yeah.
Woo! There you have it. So you can live your best life, guys. I told you, when we started this mental health conversation, it was really to have a deep dive into like real examples and real experiences. And I'm really hoping that you guys check out this video because we're gonna have many more conversations, just different topics, and
Right.
we're gonna, I'm gonna put some fillers out there. What do you guys want to talk about? But we kicked it off with childhood trauma. What does it look like as a kid, and what does it look like as an adult? How is that impacting you now? How can you cope with that? And we brought not just the problem, but we also talked about the solutions. So yeah, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm gonna bring the video. I'm gonna take the video down and I'm gonna bring it back up. So I'll put it out there so you guys can catch the replay. Brandon, thank you, man. I look forward to many more.
Yeah.
Hey, what's up, Toby? She said we have to allow ourselves grace and patience to grow. Amen. You
Yep.
absolutely right, Toby.
Absolutely.
Uh,
Grace in space. Grace in space.
I'm telling you. So we're gonna have many more conversations. Uh, any final thoughts to the people, Brandon?
Nah, man. Just take care of yourself. Be well, be safe, and be constructive.
Hey, have your boundaries and stand firm on your boundaries and stay patient with your growth and your development because childhood trauma, it doesn't go away. He said it's still here with us today.
Mhm.
Learn to manage and cope and seek out. Don't be afraid to raise your hand and ask for help. I want to thank everybody who tuned in tonight. Again, this is Jarvis Hill Projected with my brother Brandon Jones. We can next time. I can't wait for the. We're gonna figure out the next topic. It's gonna be fire. We're gonna continue to build. We're gonna continue to grow. We're gonna continue to serve. We're gonna continue to heal together.
Right.
Brandon, man, thank you so much, and everybody out there, like and subscribe. We'll catch you guys next time.
Peace.
Peace.